Welcome to our webinar, The DNA of an A-plus Sales Organization. My name is Loretta Faluide, and we've got a great session planned for you guys today. I am actually joined by some of the guys from SiriusDecisions. So I have Dana Theron. He's the service director from SiriusDecisions, and also Peter Zink. He's the senior research analyst. And together we're going to be talking to you guys a little bit about sales strategies and different insights which you can implement to develop an A-plus sales organization. We're also going to take a look at some of the tools and investments that you guys can make to really start to help to accelerate your sales processes and your sales teams. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Dana to get us started.
Thank you, Loretta. When we think about an A-plus sales organization at SiriusDecisions, we think about improving sales productivity and ensuring that we're maximizing the return that any company makes on the investment within their sales organization. And about a year ago, we did a research study and asked chief sales officers and other sales executives how they plan to grow sales. What you can see is the responses that they gave us listed from top in the most frequent number of responses down to the bottom with the fewest number of responses. The top three responses was that sales executives expect to improve sales productivity and sales effectiveness through improving the efficiency of the organization. Second, they plan to expand their sales organization, which means that they want to hire additional salespeople and ramp them up quickly. And then third, they want to improve sales efficacy, which is just ensuring that when salespeople are hired, that they're onboarded more efficiently, that they are brought to a full quota more quickly, and that they're able to hit the ground running. When you think about efficiency and efficacy, we think about sales productivity. And the sole reason why sales operations and sales enablement exist, the sole reason why sales executives would invest in sales operations and sales enablement instead of another quota-carrying head, is to improve the productivity of all the salespeople that they've already hired. With sales productivity, it's a joint effort between sales operations and sales enablement. With sales operations focusing on the efficiency end of it, we want to ensure that the processes that are in place are optimized, that we understand how to measure and improve the productivity of the sales organization, and that we're enabling them with the right tools and with the right information that they need to compete in more opportunities. With sales enablement, they focus on effectiveness, so they want to ensure that when we do hire salespeople, we onboard them effectively, that we continue to develop their skills, that we improve their knowledge, so that when they do have the opportunity to show up in more sales opportunities, they're better prepared. So the relationship between sales operations and sales enablement is really one of improving sales productivity and improving sales performance and ensuring that you have an A-plus sales organization. When we think about efficiency within a sales organization, at SiriusDecisions, we typically do a sales activity study with almost all of our clients. We do it on an annual basis. And we send a questionnaire to salespeople. We ask them how they spend their typical week. At this point, we've done 150 questionnaires with different companies, and we have over 10,000 responses from different salespeople and different sales titles all across the spectrum. If you think about sales productivity, we break it down into these four quadrants, with the upper right-hand quadrant being time that salespeople spend directly selling to a customer. In the upper left-hand quadrant, that's time spent preparing to sell to a customer, doing research, call prep, working on issues like configurations, pricing, quoting, any kind of RFI, RFP responses. The lower right-hand side is time spent speaking to a customer but not selling them anything, so it's more around service-related escalations and issues that you would prefer not to have your salespeople engaged in. And then on the lower left-hand side, that's time spent by salespeople on internal activities, internal emails, internal meetings, sometimes even researching their compensation register so that they can understand how they get paid. That's the least productive time that they can spend. We know that the average work week for a salesperson is 53.7 hours, and they spend 13 of those hours in the upper right-hand quadrant. That time spent in that upper right-hand quadrant is typically spent mostly communicating to their customers and their prospects via email, and then you can see the amount of time that they spend in terms of phone calls, face-to-face, and web conferencing. The vast amount of communication between salespeople, prospects, and customers is now done digitally, up to 13.3 hours that's spent. The upper left-hand side, that's time spent preparing to speak to a customer. And the hour amounts that you can see that are spent in each of these, 2 hours is typically spent on meeting preparation and call strategy. The second longest amount of time that's spent on any kind of call prep or call strategy is on configuration and quote, followed by lead identification and qualification, opportunity strategy and management. In a minute, you'll see the top 5 to 10 pain points that any salesperson goes through as identified through the surveys that we collect. Most of the time that salespeople spend on an annual basis or on a weekly basis is time spent in the upper left-hand quadrant, 19.8 hours per week. On average, they spend 5.7 hours per week on customer service type issues, relationship building and networking, delivery management. When we find that companies are spending or salespeople are spending too much time in that category, it's typically because they don't have a robust customer support organization behind them or customer success organization behind them. We've seen companies change their investment strategies to focus less on adding additional salespeople to focusing more on lower cost, more efficient customer success people to take the productivity burden off from the salespeople and shift it back to a support organization. And then on the lower left-hand side, 27.7% of a salesperson's week on average is spent on internal activities. That's time spent on customer-related travel time. It's time spent on internal meetings. It's also time spent on internal emails and other non-productive activities, typically associated with internal activities of the sales organization. So you can see I just brought the slide back up. Internal reporting, sales compensation tracking, internal related travel time are all time drains on salespeople. So when companies are armed with this information, they now know where they need to focus in order to improve productivity. And the greatest return on the investment is typically in the upper left-hand quadrant when you can improve the time or reduce the time spent on deal pricing and approval, configuration, and quoting. Those are high-impact investments that sales organizations and sales operations can take. And it also requires the most amount of forethought and planning and coordination between the different organizations. But when we have seen companies focus on those different activities, we see the greatest return on the investment. Number 1 and number 2, as identified by salespeople as their top pain points, are internal communications and email and customer service issues. The internal communications and emails is typically a pretty easy problem to fix. We come up with a communication strategy so that we stop bombarding our salespeople with internal emails and asking them to respond. We ask the sales enablement organization to take responsibility for sales communications so that not just anybody in the organization can start to reach out to the sales organization and ask them to respond. We try to do it in a much more coordinated way. With customer service issues, I mentioned before that we see a larger investment, especially from SaaS-type companies, in customer success and customer support so that your salespeople can spend more hours, more time per week in actually selling to customers and focusing less on the support-type activities. And then the fifth most popular pain point that salespeople have expressed to us is lead identification and qualification. If you think about deal pricing and approval, configuration and quote, lead identification and qualification, these are typically process-related issues that require some expertise and some planning from the sales organization. But once the companies make their investments, they typically see very large returns on time, and their salespeople will spend much more time in that upper right-hand quadrant. So time to generate quotes for proposals. We asked the respondents to the survey, how much time do you spend per week on looking for proposals and CPQ-related issues? It's typically 3 hours or more, with SMB saying it's 42% of the time where they spend 3 hours, and enterprise even larger because the deals are typically more complicated and more complex. The average number of contract revisions that we see from our clients and the ones that we surveyed is greater than 3, 28% of the time for SMB, and 41% of the time for enterprise. SMB tends to be a little more systematic, and the deal sizes tend to be smaller and a little bit more standard, whereas in enterprise they tend to be more complicated, longer sales cycles. So investments in CPQ and other related tools typically pay off even larger for enterprise-type sales organizations. Now, when sales organizations and salespeople are thinking about how to approach the market and where to spend their time, we typically look at the buyer's journey, which you can see at the top of the slide as I've just demonstrated here. It starts with understanding what the status quo is within your client base, within your prospect base, and then trying to identify whether or not they're preparing themselves for a change. We call this loosening the status quo. And then they commit to a change, they explore possible solutions, they commit to a solution. Justifying the decision is really going through the contracts process, and then making a selection is when we would typically call something closed won. We have a sales journey that maps to the buyer's journey, and we try to create our sales stages so that they completely mirror those that the seller is going through at that time or that the buyer is going through. We engage our prospects, we qualify them, we develop the opportunities, we configure, price, and quote the opportunities, we generate the proposal, go through the contract stage, and then we monitor the renewals after the fact. All this time, we're trying to enable the salespeople with content, we're trying to develop their competencies, and we're trying to understand what's happening throughout the entire process through forecast reviews and through coaching sessions between salespeople and sales managers. We find that more frequent sales coaching leads to better results, and typically when we see salespeople leaving companies, they will do so because they feel as though they're not being effectively coached by their salespeople, so coaching is incredibly important. The average sales cycle that we track is 82 days, 24 different buyer interactions for any kind of a one deal, and we find that the interactions that occur between salespeople and the prospects and the customers themselves typically vacillates between 50% digital and 50% either in person or on the phone. In most cases, 44% of sales accepted leads will convert into a sales qualified lead. 24% will go from a marketing qualified lead to a closed won opportunity. And the retention levels on average is 80%. So when you look at these different interactions and these different timestamps, if your organization is performing better in any of these different metrics, you would be considered to be a high-performing sales organization. Or if you can just select a number of these and also measure yourself against these, those are typically the criteria for high performance. And anything that we can do within the sales operations organization to try to decrease that 82-day cycle time down and make our salespeople more effective and more efficient is areas where we typically focus. Now I'll hand it over to Peter Zink.
Thanks, Dana. So Dana just walked through with you how to really look and measure your organization from an efficiency standpoint. He looked at the relative productivity framework to examine those key selling activities. He looked at a key set of metrics around that aligned buyer's journey and sales process to get there. What we're going to look at now is focus a little bit more on that effectiveness piece. And as Dana alluded to, yes, this has a lot to do with onboarding and training, but it's really bigger than that too. It's really about preparing that sales rep for that buyer interaction for them to get in front of a customer. And that goes far beyond just a training perspective. And it's really where the concept of sales enablement has emerged to be very full-featured in terms of how we're supporting the sales rep to ensure they have more effective buyer conversations. Now, sales enablement compared to operations is a relatively new term. And we want to start off by just defining how we're seeing it with our customers and what it actually means and what we've been able to culminate together from talking to many different clients over the last few years. And we think we've settled on a definition that a lot of organizations are coming around to as well. And that's the idea that sales enablement is designed to ensure that reps possess the skills, knowledge, process expertise, and access to assets to maximize every buyer interaction. And when we think about that definition, there's really three foundational pillars that we believe every organization needs to be focused on from an enablement standpoint to ensure that their reps are staying effective in their jobs. It starts with talent. Sales talent encompasses every sales support role from a pre-sales to sales engineer role to those direct sellers and channel sellers, and how to support their development from the moment that they attempt to join the organization, so from a hiring standpoint, to those first 30, 60, 90 days that they're getting onboarded within the organization. So what are the basics that they need to master in order to go out there and be effective in their job? To a continuous learning perspective, How do they develop a career path within an organization and continue to grow and develop over time and retain talent within an organization for 3, 5, 6, or even 10 years onward with a sales sense? So it's that whole cycle of talent that enablement tries to maybe not own, but at least play a supporting role across. The second key area is assets. And assets really talks to two key lenses there. There's the buyer-facing assets, what we like to call activation assets. So these are every asset that is usually created by a portfolio marketing organization that the sales rep is responsible for delivering to that buyer. Sales enablement often is responsible for aligning the best buyer-facing assets at the right moment to support sellers in their sales process and buyer interactions. And the other side of that coin is what we like to call empowerment assets. And empowerment assets are the things that the sales reps don't show their buyers, but they use to prepare internally before they walk into a buyer interaction. It could be a competitive battle card. It could be a piece of e-learning. It could be some video coaching material that's an example of a manager performing a good job. Either way, it's those two ideas around what buyer-facing assets, those activation assets that are needed, and what empowerment assets to support the seller are needed for success. And then Dana alluded to this from a productivity standpoint, and this is a big growth area that we're seeing right now in sales enablement, and that is sales communications. They're getting bombarded right now with emails and requests from all different functions and departments within their organization. How do we manage that flow of communications better? We're seeing a lot of sales enablement organizations step up and try to manage this flow. And it's what we call sales communications governance. And once again, there's two kind of distinct ways to look at communications. You want to be able to handle the delivery of information to sales reps, but you also want to handle the advocacy. And advocacy speaks to the idea of collecting insights from the sales reps in real time and adjusting strategy accordingly. And then across these three pillars, there's got to be some supporting elements that go into it. One is the functional structure. So the functional structure is the key roles that are within your enablement team that are supporting these three foundational pillars, but it's also the relationships that you have with other organizations within your company, from portfolio marketing to sales operations. How is that interlock occurring so that you can support and drive effective enablement for the sales team? The next is measurement and insights, and this is an area that sales operations and marketing operations is very good at, and it's something that sales enablement is finally getting its head around as well. And that is, traditionally, we have very good insight into sales performance and how, backward looking, how people have been doing. But what we haven't had good metrics around is things like content and training consumption and how that correlates with sales performance. Thanks to what we have in the way of technology and key vendors that are now supporting the sales enablement space, we're getting a much better feel for how specific pieces of content and how specific pieces of training are starting to impact the buyer's journey and sales process as people go through. So we're getting much more targeted in the way that we support our sales reps and we ought to coach them. So this is all well and good. There's a lot here. I just went through very quickly some key areas here, but actually within our research we cover 36 different sub-areas within talent, assets, and communications. So a big question that we often get, especially when we have a new sales enablement leader, is where do we actually start with all of this? What are some foundational pieces that we can put in place supporting all three of these key areas to ensure that we're successful down the road? Well, to get there, I'm going to highlight some key elements within talent, assets, and communication. The first is role-based competency definitions. So competencies, if you remember, it goes back to that core mission that I've got right up there up top. It's the knowledge, skills, and process expertise that a sales role needs to succeed. And what we mean by role-based competency definitions is these are sales enablement organizations that have taken all of their sales roles and really defined those critical knowledge, skills, and process expertise that are needed to succeed in a particular role. And it's not just listing the competencies out and saying, okay, that's good for that role. It's also thinking about where those competencies need to be developed. So think from this standpoint. When you hire somebody, you're looking for certain competencies to be there on day one. You don't just hire somebody and expect to have to train them on everything. You want to figure out the competencies that you want to select in the interview process. And then when they're getting onboarded, you need to select those competencies as well. What are those core competencies that they need to have up and running after onboarding to be able to succeed in their job? And then you're also going to realize, wow, there's some competencies that we can't develop within an onboarding program in time, or we can't even hire to that because it's so unique to our organization. So that's something that you might have to train and support on an ongoing basis over several years. So it's important that you basically split out those competencies in what we call a talent life cycle. And we'll get more into that here in a second. From an asset standpoint, where do you start? Well, often we find many organizations already have a lot of content, almost too much content. And where you want to start is what Dana was alluding to earlier with the aligned buyer's journey and sales cycle. Because if you have that, that's something that you can start posting assets up and mapping to this cycle and figuring out where they are best leveraged within a buyer interaction. So this is a key element that you can put in place to help assist on the asset mapping journey. It's something that a lot of organizations struggle with. If you get the piece of technology in place to support it, you still need to do this basic mapping and ensure that you've got a good idea of where your assets best reside. And finally, for communication, really just start with a high-level strategy. Many organizations don't have any governance or any sort of structure around how sales communications is occurring across their organization. So that strategy is talking about those two pieces that I alluded to earlier. How do we deliver information, and how do we collect feedback from the sales organization for success? Now, I don't have time to cover all three of these today, unfortunately. So I'm going to hone in on one of them, and that is role-based competency definitions. And Dana alluded to this earlier around coaching, but we've seen some data around why the competency map in particular is critical, why we're missing the mark. And what we've found is, particularly around ongoing learning and development, some interesting points have emerged. One, if you are in the enablement space or you're a learning and development professional, you've probably heard a statistic similar to this. 87% of learning is often forgotten within the first 30 days. You need some type of reinforcement in order for people to succeed. And to get that reinforcement, you have to have a baseline or an understanding of where to start. And the competency map helps you with that baseline. So if you start with that competency map, reinforce it with learning after that first 30 days to ensure the success is getting there, you can help fight this forgetting curve. The next is the idea of, we did a big survey in 2018 around sales talent, and one of these was we looked at them by performance. And what we found with high-performing sales reps is 64% of them indicated to us that ongoing training was very important when they were considering a new role. Particularly when you look at it from a millennial audience and you think about this idea of career development and growth and a focus on personal growth, that ongoing learning program and an understanding of what somebody's career path looks like as a sales rep is crucial. And last, not only is it crucial for people joining the organization, but there's a chance that they might opt to leave as well because they don't feel like there's enough of a learning program there present to support it. So we found that 36% of high performers also indicated to us that there was a significant lack motivation, lack of training in an organization might be a reason they choose to leave because they just don't see a path forward in terms of how to develop themselves to stay within an organization. So what do we do? How do we start to just get on the road to building competency maps that are actually relevant to help drive and solve some of these problems? Well, it goes back to what Dana was alluding to around the sales activity study. You really want to observe and understand all of the activities that your sales reps are executing on a regular basis. And you want to analyze those activities and ask some key questions around it. You want to split those activities, one, into the buyer-facing ones, what we call the selling motions, and those that they tend to do more from an administrative standpoint or behind the scenes, but that are still very important, like account planning. And then you ask, What are the knowledge, skills, and process expertise that has to inform every single one of these activities? Now, as enablement professionals, we like to think we know every single piece of knowledge or skill or process that's needed to support it, but the reality is we don't. So once you have that initial list, it's important that you go back and you survey some of your high-performing sales reps to just do a gut check and say, does this make sense? Does this look like what you had to learn and what you execute on a regular basis in order to be successful? And from there, you build your competency maps, and you align it to those 3 stages that we talked about earlier: hiring, onboarding, and continuous development. So you ask what competencies you want to hire for, you ask what competencies you need to onboard in a program, and you ask what competencies are going to take more time but need to be developed progressively throughout the organization as you go along. And once you have this in place, not only does this feed into the training programs that we talked about earlier, but it also feeds into content needs as well. You're going to understand what kind of content that you need to support a sales team. And then it also feeds into your technology investments. You can have a better understanding of the types of tools that you need to include in the technology stack that supports your sales reps. So this is really the kicking off point and the fundamental element that needs to be in place in every sales enablement organization to be there. And once you have that in place, then you're able to do something that I call really cool stuff. And really cool stuff looks something like this. Now, you'll have to forgive us. It's a bit of a chicken scratch dashboard compared to what you might see in a piece of software, but the idea here is very cool. What you're looking at right now is what we call a sales coaching dashboard. So you've got the basics in place: onboarding, ongoing learning, assets. What you're seeing here is essentially a dashboard for a single sales rep where it looks at not only their performance, but what the activities they do, and also what learning content and certification stuff that they have embraced over time, what they've been consuming. And you roll that up into a single cumulative score. So you can see here there's some different weightings. Organizations change where that wants to be, and you study the attainment against the goals that you set to get there. So what this gives is a great roll-up and an ability for managers to drill down and really focus on specific aspects for coaching. And we're just finding this to be really cool and something that organizations, when they get here, are really satisfied with. And beyond just managers supporting this, there's a lot of exciting things going on in terms of machine learning and technology, too, to really take this to the next level. And I'm going to hand it off to my colleague, Dana Tarian, to walk through some of the developments that we're seeing in that space.
Thanks, Peter. We know that high-performing sales organizations are organizations that constantly get maniacal focus on improving sales productivity. It starts with understanding where your salespeople are spending their time. We know on average they spend 53.7 hours per week working. We also know that 40.4 of those hours are spent on administrative and preparation time. The question is, why don't reps engage with some of the technologies that we've created for them when they're only spending 13.3 hours worth of selling? Most of the time it's because the engagement platforms that we provide to them, the technologies that we give to them, are giving them nothing back. So when you're investing in technologies, when you're investing in solutions, it's incredibly important to understand that the sales reps are looking for coaching, for guidance, and for opportunities to make their lives easier. And what we found is that CRM systems are often time drag. These systems take information from salespeople and they typically don't give them anything back. But Peter alluded to the fact that artificial intelligence and other solutions are trying to solve some of these problems. So what we've noticed in the past is that any of the systems in the engagement platforms that sales reps typically interact with are taking information, but artificial intelligence and other advancements are giving them information back, and it's providing it in the form of coaching with guidance on what actions and what steps to take next. So understand the sales productivity equation inside of your own organization, understand where some of these productivity drags are, and constantly look for solutions that are going to enable reps, that are going to make them more efficient, more effective in what they do. Loretta, I'll hand it to you.
Thanks, Dana. So what I wanted to do today is just kind of look at some of those technologies that Dana talked about as to how do you get a sales rep to get something out of your sales automation platform. So Here I have a diagram, and what you can see is that you've got the CRM, and you've got your CPQ, and you also have your ERP system. CPQ technology is a solution or is a tool, an application that is embedded within your CRM. But what it does is that it allows a salesperson to basically automate a lot of the monotonous sales tasks that they are dealt or that they have to deal with every single day. And for those of you guys out there who are not too familiar with what CPQ stands for, it stands for Configure, Price, Quote. What I wanted to do is to take you guys back to the very beginning, and what I have is a methodology which is very similar to what Dana talked about if you look at the buyer's journey. And another way which you'll hear a buyer's journey or a sales journey being called is quote to cash. And quote to cash basically is just a sales methodology that describes the different steps in which a salesperson takes to be able to complete a full sales cycle. So Dana talked about how it takes about 82 days to complete a sales cycle. And in a traditional sales cycle, you'll see things like a salesperson needing to find a product or create a configuration. They need to understand what the pricing is, create the quote. They've got to put together the contract for the customer. Then they've got to send this information to their billing and invoicing department. And then if you want to basically retain the customer, you've got to do a renewal process. Well, the challenge right now is that the quote to cash process for a salesperson, and the reason it's taken so long for them to get through a sales cycle, is that it exists in many disjointed systems. So if you look at like your product or your service configuration needs, a salesperson might have like an internal digital catalog, or maybe you've got an online catalog. To create the pricing, they have to go work with the ERP, or they've got to maybe work with the different business units. To create the quote, a lot of guys or a lot of sales teams are still relying on Excel. And if they need to create an RFP, they've got to create these types of Word documents manually. Then if you need a contract and order management solution, you tend to rely on a third-party solution. So now you've got to take all the information that you have and now transfer that into a contract solution. And then the billing and invoicing is done with the billing software, and then renewals are typically done manually. So if you look at the hurdle that a salesperson has got to go through just to get a quote out to a customer, it's one of those things that can be challenging. And not only to get the quote, but to get everything ink signed and to get that customer onboarded to where they have now renew and repeated business. It's something that can be very, very daunting for a salesperson, and what tends to slow the sales cycle down. Now, if you look at where CPQ solution comes into the mix, what CPQ is doing is that it's consolidating the quote to cash process. And within a CPQ application, what you'll now see is an application that is able to now streamline a lot of the different steps that a salesperson has got to do to go through a full sales cycle. Now, Dana and Peter talked about artificial intelligence. And the question is, well, how does artificial intelligence kind of play into here? And what you tend to see is that AI technologies or AI or artificial intelligence and machine learning techniques and insights start to be infused or inserted into the different steps that a salesperson has got to take. So you'll see AI being delivered into the product and service configuration, and what you'll see is that AI provides different recommendations based on what it might know about the customer. So it will say, hey, based on this customer, here's some products or here's some configurations that you might want to put together. And you have AI technologies that can also do things like provide pricing. So it's not just a list price or a salesperson going off and just discounting based on their gut instinct, but we'll talk about pricing in a couple more slides. Now, what I wanted to also point out is that AI technologies are also even going before this process starts. So CPQ applications, what you've seen is that they traditionally have helped sales guys to be able to find the products, price the products, or put the quote together, send out the proposals, maybe manage the different agreements, etc. But what CPQ technologies that have AI or AI-based insights, they're even going before that, and they're helping during the lead generation process. So Dana talked about how lead generation is also an area in which a sales guy is spending time trying to figure out, okay, who am I going to sell to? With AI, they're able to now find those leads and have those leads delivered to them directly into the CRM. So this is just a way you're now seeing AI making a difference in CPQ applications. And the CPQ applications, in turn, providing that gift to get that Dana talked about when it comes to sales automation platforms. Now, I do want to point out something is that all sounds great, but what CPQ solution provides everything that you need today? And the answer is there is not one that can do all the functional blocks of a quote-to-cash process well. You'll hear different vendors that specialize in being able to do configurations really well, or being able to do contract lifecycle management very well. But today, there is no vendor that is able to walk through that entire process and to do it well. So then the question for you is, well, which solutions should you invest in? What should you spend your money to be able to get that return for your sales organization and for the business? Well, what I would recommend is that you actually spend time or invest your money in CPQ solutions that can help to provide the best ROI. And if you look at the places that actually impact your bottom line, it's in finding the product. So this basically determines which products, so which categories, what is in my portfolio that I'm going to sell this customer. Pricing. Pricing is a very, very key piece, because what that does is that it now locks your revenue and also your profitability. And renewals. Dana showed a great stat that 80% of customers can actually going through the renewal process. So these three areas are very, very critical for you to focus on. And when you're looking for a CPQ solution, to find vendors who have very, very good competencies in being able to deliver product or service configuration, great pricing, and also a renewal process that's automated. This way you can actually streamline that process and actually make it faster for your sales teams. Now, even in the CPQ applications, what I wanted to do is to focus on pricing. And that is because pricing locks in your revenue and also your profit for the deal. So if you take a look at it and you look at how traditional pricing has been done, there are a couple of ways which a salesperson can do pricing. So let's imagine a scenario. You've got a salesperson who's got to provide a quote to a customer. Well, once they go into the digital catalog, what they tend to see is the list price for that product. Savvy businesses then have a pricing curve that they now provide to the salesperson that is dependent on the volume break. So if they are selling maybe 1,000, 10,000, here's the price that you need to offer this customer. What that doesn't do is that it doesn't provide any kind of insight into the business that that customer is in. And not only that, if the customer puts pressure on the salesperson to drop the price, what the salesperson does not have is any insight as to should they drop the price, should they keep the price the same. And what you tend to see is that a lot of sales guys now then just add additional discounts based on their gut instinct. Or they might go off and actually spend some time doing research on different competitive websites to figure out, okay, what price do I need to provide this customer? What that does is that it starts to it causes that business to leak margin or to leak revenue, because what a salesperson then is now discounting based on their gut. And what we're saying here is that they should not they should not rely on gut. A salesperson should not have to spend a lot of time trying to find out what price they should be selling to the customer by researching competitive websites, or they shouldn't have to spend a lot, or they shouldn't have to rely on their gut to basically provide that price. And if they have an AI-based solution or an AI-based pricing, what they can do is they can eliminate that revenue leakage. They can even automate the pricing approval process, and they can accelerate win rates. There's something that one of the executives that I admire said to me, and she said that data, or a company's data, is one of the most underutilized assets that a company has. And if you think about it, a company's data tells you everything that you need to know about your customers. But many times you don't rely on that data to provide the insight that you need, because you have to take the time to parse the data. So this is why artificial intelligence and machine learning insights now, or techniques and algorithms, now come into place. With a company's data, what you can do is that you can now you can take that data, you can aggregate that data. And then what you do with that data is that you now start to figure out what are the key attributes in this data that matter. And these are what attributes are significant. And based on those, you can now create peer groups. So a very, very simple example, you're selling to a food customer. Well, within the food industry, there are lots of different ways in which you can segment them down. You can say, okay, I want to segment them by types of food. So you have fast food restaurants versus dine-in restaurants. And even within dine-in restaurants, you can further segment that, and you can look at things like Italian food restaurants or Chinese food restaurants. And what those start to do is that you now start to notice different buying behaviors and different pricing that move those markets. And then what that does is that as artificial intelligence and algorithms observe those things, it can now start to do things like figure out what is the willingness to pay. What type of frequency do these types of buyers tend to have? What's their propensity to buy such product versus another? What does their attrition pattern look like? And if I want to sell them more product, what do those more products look like? This is how artificial intelligence can now start to provide you with those insights into how do you need to help your sales guys sell to your customers, sell the right products, but doing it at the right price. When they're able to do that, it's going to provide not only a fast sales process, but a great buying experience for the customer. So here, I'm going to give you guys an example, and this is, we talked about the food customers, but this one is actually a very, very interesting example, because what it does is that it gives you a sentence. And based on this sentence, you can now start to derive different information around what should your pricing be for this customer. So the sentence is, you need to deliver a winning price on a spot order of 5,000 feet, a 14-wire alarm cable for a high-spend electrical installation company in Atlanta, Georgia. And this is also sourced from Atlanta, Georgia. If you look at what matters in this sentence, there are different insights which provide you so that a salesperson understands, okay, what should I be paying attention to? Winning price. What winning price is going to do is that it's going to provide you some financial analysts. A spot order is going to tell you the pricing type. So a spot order versus maybe a subscription order versus maybe an agreement order. The product, it's 5,000 feet of your fire alarm cable. Then the customer size, it's a high-spend customer. Then you look at the electrical installation company. This is a customer type, so it's already told you what segment it is. And then it tells you that this is in Atlanta, Georgia, so it's provided you the location. And then the warehouse is also in Atlanta, Georgia. There's so much insight when a salesperson hears or is listening to the customer and is getting some information. They need to put a quote together. What you can now start to do is that with a good pricing optimization methodology that's based on AI, you can now start to derive different things based on that sentence. So you know customer A needs to purchase the fire alarm cable. So the question is, what is the right price? So you look at what you know about customer A. Well, they're a large spend customer, so that takes you into a different segment. Then you know that the warehouse is also from Atlanta, Georgia. And you also know that they're an electrical installation company. So this now further takes you, brings you into a smaller segment. And based on this, you now have insight as to how you need to price that product for this customer. This is exactly where you need to be getting your sales organization to. Pricing is one of the biggest challenges that sales tend to have as they're going through the sales process. And when you have a pricing optimization methodology that's based on AI, you can now take this insight and you can provide it to your pricing team, to your sales organization. So what you see here is just a screenshot of a CPQ solution. Remember, CPQ is now integrated into the CRM. And as the salesperson is walking through the configuration process, they found the product that they want to sell to the customer. When it comes to pricing, they can now get the AI-based insights that you basically just did with your pricing optimization methodology. Sorry, I went back a little bit too far. So here, what you can now do is that you can get this insight and you can deliver this insight directly to your sales organization. And now they have AI-based winning prices that do not have to sacrifice their margins. We actually have a customer who implemented the pricing optimization solution and methodology, and what they were able to do is that they were able to recover $1 million, and this is $1 million in incremental revenue per month, just by implementing some of the processes and making sure that their sales organizations were disciplined enough to be able to pass along the pricing to the customers. So with that, I'll begin to wrap up. As you look at CPQ solutions, as you look at ways to streamline your quote-to-cash process, or as Dana says, as you look at how you now are overlaying your selling methodology or your selling process with the buying process, with the buyer's journey, one of the key pieces that you've got to look at is your pricing. There are a lot of other competencies that CPQ solutions will provide. And you also need to take a look at what are some of the hurdles that your sales organizations are facing. Is the biggest hurdle the biggest time sink in creating your quotes? Is the biggest time sink in trying to do your billing and invoicing? Those are also some key ways that can alert you to the types of CPQ solutions that you can get or that you should be investing in. One of the things that we will always recommend is that as you do take a look at CPQ solutions, as you do take a look at vendors, make sure that the vendor that you get or that you are interested in has pricing optimization that is based on AI, because this can help to even further accelerate your processes. So it's going to help to increase your sales productivity and also accelerate your sales velocity. So with that, we're going to begin to wrap up. So it looks like we've got a couple of minutes left. So what I want to do is just take a couple of questions from the audience. And we've got a question, so I'm going to ask this question, and either Peter or Dana or myself will answer the question. So the first question, what's the biggest gap that you see in terms of what organizations are getting wrong in enabling their sales teams?
Oh, yeah, I can take that question, Peter. Loretta.
Yep.
Yeah, besides, obviously the cognitive mass is a big one. We talked about that in the presentation, but, you know, we joke a little bit. We call it, sometimes we meet with an organization and it's not called sales enablement. We call it sales inflictment almost. And what we mean by that is people go too far the other way, where they're just overwhelming their reps with too much training, too much content, and they're not being targeted and smart about how they kind of deliver that specific enablement. So technology is helping with that. We're seeing more collection, like we said, around metrics, and AI is playing a role in being more selective in terms of what's revealed to sales reps to help enable them. But there is still that sort of old school mentality of let's slam them with lots of e-learning and they'll retain it in some cases, and that's just not the case. So just be intelligent and targeted in terms of how you're enabling your sales reps is what I would say.
All right, fantastic. So it looks like there's another question. The question is, what are you most excited about when it comes to AI in the sales technology space?
Loretta, this is Dana. I can take that one. I think you really described it because we traditionally thought of configure, price, quote as being somewhat of a static process where you've got a price book and then you select your products from that price book and it's got a static price that gets associated with the quote that gets sent out to the customer. But when you understand the situation and you understand the customer a little bit more deeply, then you can start to get into dynamic and situational pricing models that dictate the price based upon what's happening right now. Artificial intelligence gives us the ability to take what we previously called diagnostic sales intelligence that was typically run by some sort of an analyst or somebody with a very large spreadsheet or data warehouse, and they push it into the hands of salespeople where they can respond more quickly. Artificial intelligence is collecting all these different data signals from different sources. It's packaging it back into very intuitive ways so that salespeople can make situational decisions and change the outcome almost immediately. It used to take us months and weeks of analysis before we could make these types of decisions, and that's where really AI is starting to play in.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better, you know. All right, the last question I think we have, or the third question we have, what kinds of results can we expect if we manage to improve sales productivity in our own organization?
I can take that one as well, Loretta. If you think about improving sales productivity by 5%, which is typically measured by bookings per head or revenue per head within a sales organization, if it's a $250 million company, which is a pretty standard size for a small growing company, that's $12.5 million worth of bookings per year or revenue per year that could be added to the top line. So instead of hiring those additional salespeople where you know you're going to get diminishing marginal returns, each one that you add will produce a little bit less. Try to hold on to the ones that you have, get to an optimum number of salespeople, and then work on systems, processes, efficiencies, and effectiveness measures that are going to help improve their productivity. And really set yourself a target, 1%, 2%, 3%, 4%, 5%. 5% is huge. 3% is really great. So you can see it in terms of real dollars realized either through bookings or revenue or both.
Great. Thanks so much, Dana. All right, so I think that about wraps it up for today. We just want to thank you so much for joining us for this webinar. We hope that it was very insightful to you, and we hope that you've learned a couple of things around different sales strategies, sales enablement practices that you can now go off and actually implement into your sales organization, and even tools that can help to provide that stickiness that is needed so your sales organizations can leverage their sales automation platforms and really start to accelerate their sales processes and their deal velocity. So with that, again, this is Loretta Faluide. I just want to, and I was joined, this is Loretta Faluide. I'm actually from Pros, and I was joined by Dana Tyrion and also Peter Zink from SiriusDecisions, and we just want to thank you, gentlemen, for joining me to host this webinar today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.